Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Leschwitz Recital Hall. At this time, we ask that you please silence your electronic devices and locate the nearest exit in the event of an emergency. Please note that food, drink, and flash photography are not permitted in the hall. Thank you and enjoy the performance.
Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Aaron Helgeson. I am the coordinator of composition and music theory here at the Cali School, and I'm very pleased to welcome Paola Prestini, who's an artist in residence this year for us. She'll be coming in throughout the year, but this is her first visit with us, so I'm very excited to finally have you on campus and interacting with our students. Paola is a composer who has done all sorts of really amazing interdisciplinary projects, including her project Hubble Cantata, which we may talk a little bit about today, which was the world's first community VR opera, so nice claim to fame there. We'll also talk a little bit about Con Alma, which is her project that's a collaboration with our other guest, Magos Herrera, who's in today. That's an album and a live digital work that was performed recently at the United Nations. So really amazing projects. She's won awards from the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, the New York Council for the Arts, and New England Foundation for the Arts. She's collaborated with the New York Phil, with Minnesota Opera, Brooklyn Youth Chorus, and she's had residencies at Mass MoCA and American Academy in Rome. And so we're very pleased to have you, and welcome. And I'll remember to use my mic here. Yeah, we're recording this, yeah? We're good? Okay. Great, so welcome to the Cali School. Really great to have you this year.
Thank you.
And I thought we'd get started talking a little bit about your background as a composer, and specifically, you know, one of the big elements of your work is this kind of interdisciplinary multimedia aspect of things. And you've talked elsewhere about kind of working on a long-term scale for these projects. And so I just want to know a little bit about, you know, what was your journey in terms of composing, and then also how did you start getting involved in all of this interdisciplinary multimedia work?
Absolutely. So first of all, I just want to thank you so much for having me. It's a total honor to be here for the year, and I have such admiration for all you guys do. So I'm very excited for the year, and I hope to get to meet everyone. I have like a little slideshow, so I thought that, you know, just when it's appropriate, when I think about, you know, how you get started in composition or really any kind of musical life, I think it's so crucial to think about identity and how your identity really informs you, because, you know, at the best, that is the voice that you have, and that's what makes you and sets you apart from anybody else in the universe. So I like to take it back to the border, which is actually where I was raised. I was raised in a town called Nogales. It's between two worlds, so it's between the United States and Mexico. And my dad's house was literally a stone's throw. The border didn't exist when I was a kid. That's how old I am. We didn't even have a wall. So, you know, I think back to that time about why I'm so interested, not just in collaboration and interdisciplinarity, but also what it means to bring people together who typically don't belong together, and I say that with big quotes around it, on the concert stage. And I think a huge part of it was the disparity that, you know, that I went through growing up on the border, which is that, you know, you have the American side, which at the time was affluent, and the Mexican side, which at the time was not. And actually those things have completely reversed now, which is very interesting. But also the kind of crossing back and forth from two worlds, and that kind of fluidity of culture, and the, you know, the aspirations that people felt in terms of America, but for me, how much it meant to actually have Mexican culture in my life, and how much that informed everything. I immigrated from Italy when I was a kid. But I put these stairs down because this is the new way that Juilliard encourages people to come, which are these very unapproachable stairs. And that's actually where I went to school and got both of my degrees. And it was there that I began my first company, which is called Vision into Art, and it still exists today. And that was really when I began to think, well, the school has so many amazing disciplines, I want to put them together, and we didn't have any classes at the time to do that. So I began this first nonprofit, and really at that point won the most important award that has informed me to date, which was the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowship, which was for New Americans. And I remember when I was at Juilliard, I was having a tough time there because there was a lack of transparency in terms of what it meant to have a career, both as a woman and as a composer. And it wasn't until I won that fellowship that I began to really realize how I could play a part of the larger ecosystem in the world, because all of a sudden there were businessmen talking about sustainable economies and people thinking about other people besides themselves. And then this is my last slide, and I promise I will stop talking. But I met Paul Soros, who was this incredible businessman, and he said, if you have one piece of pie, what do you do? And we all said, you share it. And he said, absolutely not. You make more. And that became how I began to think about, well, then it means that I'm not waiting for an opportunity, I'm actually making the opportunities. I can actually affect my surroundings. I'm not gonna worry as much about not winning things or, other problems that I had at the school, and it really changed everything. And this goes back to this, which is, how many of you read Silence by John Cage? Okay, yes, I see some hands, fabulous. So this is my favorite story in it, which is that a young person goes to study with a teacher of choice in the forest. And he goes to the teacher and he says, I'm here to study with you. And the teacher says, okay, great, go back and sweep your house. And the next day he comes again, and he says, great, go back and sweep your house. Keeps coming, keeps turning away. And then finally, months later, he goes and he says, thank you so much for what you've taught me. Which again, is not to say that you don't learn so much from your teachers, but ultimately, the job and the responsibility is yours. It's yours to clean your house, it's yours to make your house, it's yours to absorb what you can, it's yours. So that's a little bit of the start.
Cool, and one thing I want to follow up on is this idea that you've talked about of making opportunities for yourself, making opportunities for other people. I know that for a lot of us, at least of my generation and your generation, these aren't skills that we're taught in a music conservatory. And I know a lot of students in the room, that's something that they're starting to think about, is what kind of skills do I need once I get out into that professional world? Where did you get those skills? Like, how did that come to be for you?
I mean, a lot of it was trial and error, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I think that, it was, what I loved about having the time at school was that, to me, it was the perfect time to try things out and to fail. And so that's why I thought, well, the best place to start a nonprofit is while you're in school. Because first of all of your teachers know people, and you can ask each of them for a contact, and that person will introduce you to another world and another thing. And so in a way, if you use school, truly as a professional development tool, then you really actually have this kind of safe space, if you will, to experiment. So that's really what I was doing. I was setting up the nonprofit. I was thinking a lot about, what does it mean, in terms of me having a career, knowing that certain things weren't going to be so easy for me. What did it mean to start trying things out? And so I was, creating multimedia performances. I was thinking a lot about collaboration. I was thinking about, with the first company that I founded, which is this company, Vision into Art, I was thinking, okay, well, clearly I'm interested in this kind of interdisciplinarity. What happens when I tour? How do I tour? How do I, create the materials? And so it was really step by step. I don't want to say that it was like all of a sudden a light bulb went off, but it was clear to me that the way that my teachers were having a career, which was very much rooted in the academy and winning awards in like kind of a very specific way, was not the way that I was going to do it. And also I looked to see, well, who is doing things in a different way that I might adopt some of their practices? And so modeling your career on people who you admire, knowing that it's going to be tailored to, again, to your specific DNA is really crucial. And so at the time, I was thinking, well, I like how Philip Glass is doing his career. I like the fact that he's able to do all these different things, and he has his own company, he's responsible for people. I liked Zorn, because with Zorn, John Zorn, he could, in fact, he just opened at National Sawdust, the venue that I founded this weekend. He did this incredible evening of like Sondheim-like love songs, and the next minute writing the most acid jazz or acidly classical intellectual music, and it's all him. And that freedom to have voice, and to have voice be however you say it's gonna be, I had not seen before. And so I was starting to model things that way, looking at Banging on the Can, looking at Robert Wilson. Robert Wilson, of course, had Watermill, right, which is his center where he tries things out. And of course, there were no women that I could model after. So that was like a big aha moment. I was like, oh, okay, this is something. wasn't aha because I was going through it, but it was something to address, which of course the gender kind of equity aspect is something that I've kind of returned to over and over in my life.
Yeah, I think that's something that hopefully we'll pick up on a little bit later in the conversation today, around how to cultivate opportunities for women and all sorts of members of the community that are usually marginalized out of things. But before we get too far into the conversation, I know you brought some music with you today, and I'm hoping maybe we could just listen to a little bit of a clip just to get to know your voice and
Sure.
And what things sound like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I thought that maybe, not to dive in so deep immediately, but I think I might just do it. This is the opera I'm writing right now. It's called Sensorium X. One of the things that I want to say to all of you composers, anybody starting off, is that often failure allows you to really sharpen what you want to put out there. This was actually commissioned by a major opera company, and they ended up dropping the commission. And they dropped it because they weren't equipped to deal with the level of integration in terms of disability that I wanted to do. So this is a work that really bridges disability and artificial intelligence, and is a work that I'm doing with Brenda Shaughnessy. She's the poet. These are some stills. We ended up being invited to Cape Town to do the very first, so it's a deaf choir, to do the very first workshop. And then, yeah, so here's a little bit. This is, it is going to the Kennedy Center in the fall. And this was, yeah.
Sensorium X, Overture. Mem and Sophia pondering the question, who is who? Corp reveals Sophia will protect humanity by downloading representative data of all human experiences and assimilating them. And Field necessitates harvesting the FOXP2 protein, which Kitsune has, among other things. Mem and Kitsune weigh their limited options, imagining what would happen if they submit to court, or they can flee into the unknown, taking a chance on their own, aiming for some path to live peacefully together.
that's entirely disability-led project with people who have cerebral palsy, different kinds of disabilities. Our co-director is incredible, also has CP. And Brenda Shaughnessy, who is the writer, her son is nonverbal and non-ambulatory, which means he doesn't speak or he doesn't talk. But it really got us thinking about what are the questions of voice? What does it mean to have voice? Just because we communicate perhaps in language, what does it mean to communicate in other ways? And how do people of different disabilities belong in the spaces of opera that can be so exclusive and so already telling you that you don't belong? So this turned into a passion project, and it's funded by the Ford Foundation. And yeah, and it has a very incredible cast. Lucia Lucas is the person who was playing Corp, which stands for corporation, who's trying to harvest the DNA of this young child, who's played by Thomas, who in fact does not speak verbally. Yeah, and this was the workshop that we did at the Shed in May.
It's a really beautiful preview of what I hope to see in its entirety at some point. And just a couple of follow-up questions about this, and then we can kind of transition into other things. But not to antagonize the presenter that you were working with, but one of the things you mentioned was this idea that you run into certain institutional obstacles when you're trying to do a work like this. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, just first of all, because we do have some students in the room who are interested in writing opera, like what does that process of developing an opera look like, and how does this particular project run into the capabilities of presenters and different constituents in that process when you're trying to really do something that's outside of the genre conventions?
Totally. So I mean, I am able to follow rules. Like I did do a grand opera with Minnesota Opera, and to me that was like, okay, I'm getting commissioned. They're going to tell me who my librettist is. They're going to tell me everything, and I'm going to follow the rules. I'm going to write a grand opera, and I enjoyed it, and I learned a lot. That was not this. You know, this from the beginning was always meant to be a story about a disabled child, and a story about, you know, disability. And to me, you cannot write about things, first of all, without lived experience. And I, of course, in you know, the most obvious ways don't have experience with disabilities. So to me, that was, well, we need a team that really does, because that's what representation means. And that's kind of where we came at an impasse, which was that there really wasn't a rubric for how to bring people with different disabilities in a safe space into a room. And the company that I run, besides National Sawdust, does my own work. And what I knew was that within our team, we could actually develop a safe space, because we are interested in what does it mean for things that seemingly don't belong together to thrive, right? And what it means is that, one, it takes more time. Two, it takes specialists. So we have an advisory board of specialists from around the world. And three, honestly, it takes money. And that's okay to say, right? Which is that, you know, these rehearsal processes aren't the same. Like, opera is grueling. You have like 10-hour days, and if you can't make it, too bad. And I felt that, like, when I was, you know, first emerging in the field. My husband was touring all the time. I had a young child, and I couldn't make certain processes. I couldn't afford childcare. I couldn't afford to, you know, I couldn't afford to be part of the game. You know, so in a way, like, understanding that, to me, it's like, well, what does it mean to really bring together people so that we thrive, right? And that is what I'm interested in. Like, in all the work that I do, I like to bring together, you know, for example, Helga Davis, who's an amazing improviser. I work with her. She doesn't read music. Okay, well, her process is going to be radically different from an opera singer who comes, learned, but doesn't mean that what she's bringing isn't as great. It just means that the processes need to change. And so that's what we did with Sensorium X, and I kept trying to say to the opera company, let's partner. My company does this. But in opera, it doesn't really work that way all the time. You know, so there's a little bit of the kind of, well, we're doing this, we're leading the process, and I didn't feel comfortable putting an opera on about disability without disability represented. So then I just cut the line.
Yeah, I think there's this really interesting thread in disability studies in the recent past, this idea that people aren't disabled, but institutions are disabling of people. And so I think one of the things that you're clearly doing that I think we can all think about is what are the things that are disabling to participation for people with different kinds of mental and physical disabilities, and how do we include them? And I think part of this takes the time that you take to develop projects, that these things don't come on a cycle where you get a commission, you finish it, you finish the score, within a year you deliver it, and that's kind of it as the composer. And so it's funny you brought up John Cage, because in a setting similar to this, there was an interview with him with a journalist who asked him, you're busy lecturing, you're busy composing, you're doing visual art, you're doing all these things. How do you find time to compose? And he had this response of, well, I have a slow way and I have a fast way. And he said, these days I only ever have time for the fast way. And I think it's interesting to look at, like, what is the slow way? What is the timeline of that? How do you kind of produce something step by step? And one project, I mean, this is your process with a number of different projects, but I want to turn now to a project that is a little bit further in the past than this one, but not too far, which is Con Alma. And it's a work that you developed with Magos Herrera, who we have fortunately today. Magos is a singer who's worked at a number of different venues like Lincoln Center, Millennium Park in Chicago, the San Francisco Jazz Festival. She's collaborated with folks like the Kronos Quartet, and received awards from the Berkeley Latin Masters Award. She's Grammy nominated for her album Distancia, and she's won an award from National Fund for Culture and the Arts in Mexico. So very, very happy to welcome you, Magos. Yeah, so I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit, Magos, about how you were introduced to Paola, and a little bit behind the history of how this project was developed kind of from the early stages of things.
Sure, well, first of all, very happy to be here with you all, and very happy to be here through Paola and Con Alma, which is, I would add to everything that Paola just said, is love. You really need to love what you do and the initiatives that you have, because you really need to power things through all the time. So I think that's a key element, and Paola has it in abundance. So yes, we collaborated in this beautiful project during the pandemic, during lockdown of COVID-19, and we both live in New York, and I was in Mexico, Paola was in Arizona, and just a friend's call, how are you thriving this, how are you doing, and the natural response to that call was, we need to do something through music to understand what is going on, and just to transcend our personal experiences. And it was a one-year process, since maybe a little less, since we decided that we were going to do something together from isolation. But the interesting thing about this project, now that I look in retrospective, is that we come from very different backgrounds. I come from jazz, I'm Mexican. So, I mean, although we've been collaborating for the last 15 years, we met through a friend in New York, and immediately I was, drawn and filled with curiosity about Paola and her music, and she loves Mexico, so I wanted to understand why. And then with National Sawdust, she invited me to be part of the artistic advisory board, and so it's really been a long relationship, a long friendship, but it was through Con Alma that I truly understood Paola's voice. And because we had to navigate it together, and we compose each other in our homes, and so it was a beautiful exercise of true collaboration to really, and trust. That's the main thing. I knew that whatever she was going to write, I was going to be completely open to navigate through that, and the other way around. And it was a beautiful experience, and I think that opened doors also in a deeper level as friends, because now I understand just in a different level where her voice comes from, and I guess the other way around, and it was a great adventure, and it still is, like Con Alma is this kind of projects that have a life of itself. We're doing a documentary on it, since it's such a powerful story. So this image that you see here, it's by Spanish painter Remedios Varo, a surrealistic painter that lived in Mexico during the 20s, 30s, and it's like this bird, female bird that is kind of like in a lockdown, in a cell, but it looks more like a monastic cell, and the light that comes into the window animates the bird that she is painting, and the birds that go out through the window, hopefully they're bringing a new light. So that was like the perfect metaphor to this adventure, Con Alma. Con Alma means with soul, which was the only way we could imagine we were able to thrive through the pandemic, and I think it's a project that it has its own wings. We just presented it at the UN during the most important conference for gender equality. And it was really powerful, not only because of what the venue represents, but also because they put in the center of this conference music as a tool of transformation. And I think that's why this piece was so important to be presented there. To really use music as a tool of social transformation.
I just want to go back 1 second, because one of the things that I loved about the project was really the idea of social media as a positive social impact tool. And so what we did, because Magos had the support of the Mexican Ministry of Culture and the Mexican government, and we had WQXR and PBS, we were able to disseminate a call for people to share their sounds of isolation. And we started receiving floods of people's sounds of isolation that were so beautiful. And so the kind of special thing about Con Alma in the digital form was that it was not just our music, but these responses of people's sounds of isolation, and then we decided to do a countrywide chorus of Cucurucucu Paloma. So I just want to show you these two things because they're like my favorite part.
No olvidemos que allá afuera hay razones con mucha alma, razones para cada uno de nosotros, del tamaño del universo.
Adoro essa música, descobri na quarentena.
It's such a healing process. And the weirdest things we would get, like this one, which I love. Like, what is she doing? So that's one. And then this is the little responses we got, I think. Am I doing it right? That's the Cucurucucu Palomas, which we then threaded. And we didn't know any of these people.
Las piedras jamás.
So anyway, you get the picture. And then we decided then, of course, that we had to do it live. And so we did it in Mexico City, San Miguel de Allende, and then we brought it to the United Nations in partnership with Death of Classical and Carnegie Hall. And then these filmmakers decided to make an amazing documentary, which we're partnering with them on, and that's coming out next year.
Great. What I love about this and about all of your work is the way that it exists in so many different forms and so many different formats. I think the conventional idea of like, I write an orchestra piece and it's for orchestra and it happens once or twice with that ensemble and then it goes away, is just not something that, that really works anymore, and something that you've really embraced, I think, this idea that maybe it exists in just kind of a live format with professional performers. It exists with other constituents who maybe are not professional musicians and who can also enter into that, and I think that's super great. And in that vein, I think you've made a mix down actually of a little bit of the music now, and we'll hear a little bit of a performance from Con Alma by Magos.
Should I tell a little bit of the story behind it?
Yeah, maybe give us a little bit of context.
So we're doing fratres right now. So as part of this narrative of Con Alma, the way we worked is Paola wrote some pieces, I wrote some pieces, and in some cases, not all of them, I would inform, some motif or something to Paola, and she would write something, and the other way around. And then in this particular piece, which is called Fratres, which Paola can explain very specifically what it is. Maybe you explain first what it is, and then
Sure. So fratres, it comes actually from Palestrina. Palestrina did a version of it, and it's the word literally means brothers. And then I wanted to superimpose it to sisterhood. And it's the idea of what would happen if Mary Magdalene was actually afforded a seat at the table during the Last Supper. And that's it. And so the group that I wrote it for is Ciela, and we should say that during the pandemic we got Morgan Stanley to actually underwrite this, and we commissioned over 30 musicians from around the globe. So that was also, I think, something we were both really proud of.
Yeah. So she asked me to be so we have this gorgeous ensemble from Germany singing Paola's piece, and then there is this place where actually Maria Magdalena is taking her place in the table. What a powerful moment, right? Imagine if this story was told to all of us throughout history as such. So, so in a way, is my voice diving into the scene as Maria Magdalena taking my seat on the table.
I'm just realizing we didn't talk about the work.
Oh yeah, so
Actually what it looks like. I'm not going to play because I made a backing track so you guys can hear Magos live, but this is actually the live drawing. Is Kawork Murad, who's from Syria. He's amazing. He works with Silk Road, and this is some of the imagery. So just to show you that.
right, so actually he helped us throughout the process. This was presented as a virtual live event in 2020 in December, and all the imagery that you see throughout the virtual event and through all the multimedia and the album cover, that's all Kawork's, which is gorgeous, it's beautiful. Okay. was a lot of light in the house.
It's beautiful. Yeah, beautiful. Even with the backing track, it feels so personal, and so thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. What a powerful piece, I think.
Yeah, I think one of the things that runs throughout all of your work, Paola, is this idea of like centering other people's voices and voices that maybe haven't been centered in kind of concert art music in the past. And one of the things that I wanted to end on was this idea of that as a kind of activism. And one thing that we've mentioned throughout that I should state more plainly is that Paola is the co-founder and director of National Sawdust, which is a venue in Brooklyn. It started basically as a venue, but it feels like it's grown out into much more than that in terms of presenting projects and development kinds of programs. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you do at Sawdust and how that fits into your ideas of activism in general. And then maybe you could talk a little bit about, in addition to that, as we've mentioned, about your involvement in developing women's voices, a little bit maybe about the Hildegard commissioning program.
Sorry. Yes. So, has anyone here been to National Sawdust? Yay, 2 people. All right, I hope the rest of you come. National Sawdust is in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. I co-founded it in 2015. I got this crazy call from a friend of mine, Limor Tomer. We were just talking about Limor, who's a friend of both Magos and I, and she runs the Met Museum performances. And she said, "You're going to get a weird call. It's pretty crazy thing. Just take the call." And I was like, "Okay, can you give me more?" And she said, "No, I can't give you more." I was like, "Okay." So I get this call from this gentleman, and he's like, kind of awkward, and he's like, "Yeah, I want to start this venue in Brooklyn," and it just sounded so pie in the sky to me. It was like, but on the other hand, he was like, "And I need a musician, I need a composer, I need someone who has a community. I don't have the idea, I have the physical space." And it was kind of like, how do you say no to that? I was like, okay, but I think in a way what served me was that I didn't know how hard it was going to be, and I didn't understand the financials behind it. Because I think if I had understood the financials, I would have never done it. So if you read the news today, or anyone follows me on Instagram, you'll see that we just bought our building for $24 million, which is huge. And the reason I bring that up, besides thank you for the clapping, but is also just to say that one of the things I'm really interested in is, again, like, what does sustainability mean in the arts, right? Like, if it was, I didn't have healthcare until I was 37, right? And I'm driven, I work hard, like, I didn't have any contacts when I came to the city, but like, if someone as driven and as, hardworking as me has this hard of a time, everyone's having a hard time. What does it mean to create sustainable business practices? What does it mean to create sustainability? And one of the things that Kevin said to me, which I thought was really fascinating, was that there was a concept of philanthropic investment. And what it meant was that he would essentially, we would find investors, because the thing about National Sawdust, it's all about the next Renee Fleming, and it's all about the most brilliant artists like Magos and you having a home. But the thing with people with money tend to not give to that. It's like they want to know what's already proven, and everything was unproven. I was unproven. I had no name. So what he came up with was this idea, and I know I'm not getting to the question, I'm sorry, but that basically he would essentially find investors who would put money in and eventually receive the appreciated value of the real estate. So what that means is you put it in for $1, in 6 years, it's $6. You have a $5 tax deduction that for people with a lot of money, that makes a big difference. That's how we did it. So that's actually kind of interesting, right? Because it wasn't a very well-connected group of people, but there was an interesting, innovative model to business, which was one thing. Second was all of a sudden I could have a home for the people I loved. And so it really began with this group like Magos, Helga Davis, who's right there on the screen. Theo Bleckman, Jeff Ziegler, Rindy Ecker, Anthony Roth-Costanzo, like people who were in a tight community who would have a home and who would help us really bring the word out. And it was a huge part of them also saying, we believe in this space, this is our home. And one of the things I really wanted was I wanted a deep mentoring wing because that's what I didn't have. And so a huge part of how we look at our mentorship programs are through gender and through the intersection of gender and race. We now do partner with the Juilliard School where we have, we bring in women mentors. We have a program with New York, NYU, and Center for Ballet Arts. We have 4 different programs that deal intergenerationally and have a huge amount of professional development, a huge amount of money, because obviously people need money. And you know, that's actually where I'm at now. I used to joke that I was the cook, the chef, the wife, and the lover, because you would catch me like refilling toilet paper rolls and being the head of the place, and that nearly killed me. And so eventually I'm really excited that we have a brilliant managing director, Ana de la Chuleta, who runs the space now and allows me to be who I am, because I think a huge part of it was I could do those things, but my identity was really getting lost because people would be like, well, you can't possibly do all those things well. And even if I was doing it well, it didn't matter because the optics were the optics. And the truth about change is that change takes a long time. So now I have more time. I'm dealing with a kind of strategic vision, and we have an extraordinary team. But this is, this is National Sawdust. Inside, it has a constellation system. So the idea was kind of like Esterhazy, that composers of any style would want to write for the space. And so it basically has over 100 microphones and speakers in every single space so that you can create space map, which means like spatially designing sound, but also create any kind of acoustics that you want, which is exciting. Here, I'll play you a little video.
National Sawdust is this very special place. It's like a silence and chaos. And when I come here, the noise is gone, and I start to be able to see the essence of my own thought.
The work here is really intimate, and you get a chance to really feel the artist and the work.
And it takes me away from what can be so trivial and so distracting, and it makes me realize that that's why we're living. And I think that doing that with a community and with intimacy the way Sawdust can do is really valuable.
Sawdust gives space, time, and resources for projects that may not otherwise find a home.
Venues have been turning away hip-hop. And so for me to have a space to come to and say, hey, I want to rap my head off and really say something means a lot.
My residency in December, I can't think of another place in town that would have supported that in the way that that project was supported. It was a total blissful joy being here.
One thing that was really cool about that residency for me, and so this was a moment that allowed for a real cool overlap and fusion of people from LA and New York to come together and have a weekend of really rich programming.
What was shocking to me is that they asked me to do something, whatever I wanted to do. And so when we did Orphic Moments, it had a kind of energy, and in the room there was a feeling of something new. Having the support system here at Sawdust of people who are open to these kinds of ideas, who can help you realize them, who can guide you but also not limit you.
This type of thing happens very infrequently.
Because we're creating the new models in a world that needs some new models right now.
We do it because I think we're looking for this connection.
That's where I feel at home. These people who are interested in not just looking back and exploring the tradition, but sort of using that as a springboard to push this whole art form into the future.
It's our opportunity to discover new and younger voices.
And Sawdust has really given me experience and skills that I can apply all throughout the creative industry.
And National Sawdust really makes me feel like this is what I'm supposed to do, and I won't stop because of that.
So again, the idea that, like, you know, I feel very strongly, we're going to talk about this eventually, about intellectual property. I am not going to write a piece, right, that is about throat singing. I will collaborate with Tanya Tagaq, and we will deal with it in terms of intellectual property. One thing that drives me crazy about the classical field is this idea that we own everything. We do not own things. We get to collaborate with people. We get to redesign our models, and that is so crucial. You like Inuit music? Bring somebody from that tradition. Learn from them. Commission them. Do the right thing. And that's kind of the things that we're trying to do.
Great. It's a wonderful gift to the community, so thank you for that. We're coming to the end of our time here. I just want to mention a couple things about Paola's residency. She'll be visiting us basically every month for the rest of the year. We'll be taking deeper dives into all the things that we just talked about, Sensorium X, some of the things that are going on at Sawdust and the way that you go about managing that space. And a number of your collaborators are going to come in. Brenda Shaughnessy, who's the writer that's on the Sensorium X team.
Jad Abramrad, who, if y'all don't know, he had the podcast Radio Lab.
Yeah, and Luc Dubois, who's kind of doing the AI portion of things on that project. So I do hope that you stay posted about all the events that we'll be offering with Paola this year. In addition to that, I just want to, kind of put a plug in for Sawdust and the Hildegard Commissioning Project. This is this wonderful project that Paola has been doing for several years now that commissions women's composers and matches them with mentors and really develops the project from beginning to end. And some of our women composers at the Cali School are going to be participating in that, developing some work and kind of shadowing the program. So really excited to work with you on that. I know that some of you have to leave, so we won't be insulted if you slip out here, but I wanted to just leave a couple minutes for questions from the audience if anyone has anything. I'll keep the mic up here, we'll keep it efficient, and I'll kind of echo whatever the question is. Anybody have any questions for Paola or for Magos? Don't be shy. Nothing. We've covered absolutely everything. Yes.
The students first, but I'll ask one. So earlier, before you were established, when you were collaborating and starting new projects, was the fundraising first, or did you get the idea going and then present to granting organizations, or how did you deal with that order of things?
The idea always comes first. Yeah, so the idea comes first, and then, the fundraising portion is something I'd love to talk a lot more about, because I think sometimes people get so afraid of the fundraising aspect, and I think so much of it is actually just the development of real human connection and friendships. And it takes time. It's not something that can happen overnight. And that includes everything from individual donors to granting organizations. And the other thing I think that often when you don't have money, you don't understand is that people who do have money do give money away. And so why shouldn't you be that person to form that partnership? They have visions, they have dreams of where their hard money, earned money goes. And so it's a little like, I think the musician or artist mentality to feel like you're asking them something that they don't want to give away, and that's actually not true. And so a lot of it is in the psychology of how you do things, but most of all, it takes authenticity and time. And so, these projects did not start as big as they ended up. But the truth is, when you have something that's very special and you refine that ability to communicate your project, people get excited. And once people get excited, you begin to slowly be able to build that steam. But it's always idea first.
This is a large topic, but I was curious if you could share your thoughts on perhaps, as an artist who prioritizes impact through their art, what direction do you see orchestras going in the future? If you were to guide thought behind impact via orchestra.
I have not written a lot for orchestra, not because I haven't wanted to, but it's such a hard field to break into. I think there's basic things, like, when you think about like the great work that the Sphinx organization has done, a huge part of it is obviously things that I think many institutions and orchestras are thinking about, which is leadership, which is, how do you make people feel safe in certain spaces? And so I think a lot of the work isn't just about great, like bring somebody in and they're going to be fine. And it's actually about, well, what is our environment? If you have one person of color in your entire orchestra, is it safe for that person? And by safe, you may think it's safe, but it actually may not be. It probably isn't. And so I think the first step to that is really asking questions of safety, which most likely most orchestras, you know, haven't had that kind of attention to advisory boards and to kind of really making a commitment to change, which is not going to happen overnight, but to, like, you know, decades and decades. And so I think there's so many people who could speak about this so much more deeply than I, but I would say that to me, in terms of impact in orchestras, a huge part of it is programming, safe space, large, like, you know, large arching plans for the future that include different kinds of voices, sound systems. Like, I know it sounds silly, but like some orchestras, you know, they design these halls and they don't actually have sound systems for technology, you know, or it sounds really bad, and so people are going to be turned off by music that, you know, involves electronics, which it's like 80% of composers are working that way. So, you know, I think, you know, I have actually so much compassion now, having started an institution, for institutional change, because it really does require commitment, strong leadership, vision, and then the ability to not be attached to power. And so, you know, I think one of the things I didn't mention was Sawdust, but the reason there's so many curators is because, like, at the beginning, I would get thousands of emails as if I was the one curating National Sawdust. If I were curating Sawdust, I wouldn't do anything else. You know, the truth is we have curators, we have programmers, we have people who evolve so that the gatekeeping is not there. And the problem with the classical music field has been that the gatekeeping is so untransparent, so opaque, that people don't understand who's actually making these decisions. And they can be safe by, you know, propagating the same thing over and over and over. So a huge part of it is peeling back these layers of the onion, losing power, you know, and losing power is hard, because, you know, it goes back to, 300 BC with the first philosopher, was it Chiaka, the first philosopher who talked about power. It's in our bones, but it's necessary.
Great. Well, I'm so glad that you're doing all of that work.
I'm not doing all of it alone.
Yeah, and not all of it, but that you're working toward that kind of change. And I think we should all think about how we can be a part of that. So I want to thank you, and also thank Magos for joining us today. Magos is going to be working with some of our musicians a little bit later today, so thank you for spending your time with us. Really look forward to many of your collaborators over the course of the year, and I'm glad that we could start getting to know you a little bit.
Thank you so much for having me and for your beautiful questions, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.